a behavior can be very rough for one couple, can be very sexy for another couple. Somehow we start to focus more on the longevity. How can we celebrate many, many anniversaries together? And it's not on, but what's happening from one anniversary to another? What's happening in the time in between?
Pour the Heart Out. Episode 1, Toxic Relationships.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very new series that we're starting out. It's called Pour the Heart Out, wherein we're going to talk about everything, all the matters related to heart. I have with me Praneet Kaur. Okay, Praneet, hi. So let's start. Let's just dive right into it. So, what are toxic relationships if you have to explain them in layman terms?
If we go by the literal meaning of toxicity, it means poisonous. So it's essentially every relationship that turns into something poisonous, wherein it's not becoming a place of, it's no more a place of, relief, love, affection, care, understanding for you. It's become a place which is rather bringing in all the negative emotions, when it comes to relationships, we can't ever make definitive statements that this is what a toxic relationship looks like, because relationships are just so subjective, they're so contextual. I think what we can use to understand whether this is a toxic relationship or is it healthy or where are we is our emotions, allowing our emotions to be the window as to where are we at. So if you're in a relationship where you feel more angry than happy, where you're more insecure than secure, where you have more tense and more bickering times than happy times together, where you complain more than laugh more together, so all of these, what's the ratio of your emotions? So let your emotions be the window and let them tell you whether you're in a healthy relationship or in a toxic relationship.
Right, that makes sense. And I mean, when I'm listening to it, it just, I think a lot of people also confuse it between a rough patch and a toxic relationship. So where do we draw that line and how do we figure out that, now this is something that, it's not a rough patch, it's something else?
Right. This is a very important question. You see, when we talk about healthy relationships, it's not that healthy relationships are perfect, you know. Even healthy relationships have their own set of baggages, conflicts, fights. Basically, every couple fights. How do we know that their fight has turned into a toxic relationship is when the same fights are happening over and over. It means that each time an issue is coming up when we're fighting, we're not addressing the issue. We're just brushing it under the carpet. A lot of times, couple resolve their issues by having sex, by getting physically intimate. So they fought over something. There was a misunderstanding, perhaps. They were not talking to each other for a long period of time. Then they started to miss each other. They got together, they got physically intimate, they had sex. That's it. They never talked about the issue in the first place because of which they fought. So the issue is still there. You're not fighting for now, but it's going to come up again. So there are many markers that could determine when is it that you are not fighting anymore, when is it not a rough patch anymore, and it has become toxic. But I guess the biggest marker is how you're communicating to each other. That is going to make all the difference. That's going to tell you if this is still just a rough patch or are we turning into a toxic couple. So A, you're not addressing your issues. You're having the same fights over and over. B, you've started to use each other's vulnerabilities against each other. For example, last time that I was angry at my partner, I lashed out and I was nasty. And later on, I was very guilty about it. And I told them that I tend to lose control when I'm angry. Now, each time we're going to sit down to fight, my partner is going to bring that up. I entered in a very vulnerable place where I told them that this is something that I do and I'm very ashamed of it. And now my partner is using that shame against me. So this is going to really pinch me. And this is where I start to feel that my partner is not just not understanding my triggers, but they're also triggering me now. So one is that. Then, this is when it's also when we stop taking accountability and responsibility for our part, our contribution in the conflict. and our fingers are always pointing at our partner. This is when we start to tell our partner that it's all happening because of you. If only you did not do this, things would have been different. We would have not fought. This is even when partners are caught cheating. They say things like, but you have not been there for me, and what option did I have? This relationship is becoming very tense. However, that may be one of the contributing factors as to why the relationship is losing its charm. You need to take responsibility for your part, for your behavior in the relationship. And both the partners need to do that. This is when the partners start to use vulnerability against each other, stop taking responsibility, start communicating about their issues. This is where your fights start to turn into longer fights, lasting phases of these rough patches, so to speak. And before you know it, you're in a toxic equation.
And is there like a seed to it? How does it all start? Is there, I mean, have you ever noticed like a particular trend or anything that people, because I'm sure a lot of people have difficulty understanding that how did we get here, you know? So what do you think? That is there something that triggers it? Is there something that, is becoming a cause of this?
Right. So, there is no one moment that in the split second, like before this minute, we were very healthy a couple, and now suddenly we've entered into the toxic zone. It doesn't happen like that. It's very gradual. It's very, it happens very eventually. I think the problem is that when we find love, and there is this idea that surrounds love, that you found love, that's it, you've got it. There's a misconception that surrounds love, and that is that once you found love, everything is going to be okay. And if you have to work for it, if you have to work in a relationship, then it's not love, then you're trying too hard. But that's not true. You found love, great, kudos, congratulations on that. But now you need to maintain it. Now you need to continue to work on it. When two people come together in whichever capacity, romantic or otherwise, they're not going to continue to stay together just by, just celebrating the fact that they've now gotten together. You have to work in that relationship. You have to continue to nurture it like a baby. It's just like bringing a child to the world. You don't just bring a child to the world and go like, the job's done, the hard part is over, I've delivered a baby, too much work. Yeah, now let the baby be. And we've done our part, which is celebrated. And imagine continuing to celebrate having a baby and not really focusing on nurturing that baby. It's not going to turn out very well. The baby might as well just leave you eventually, because you were not there. So that is exactly what happens in every relationship. You conceive love, you give birth to love, and then you've got to nurture it, you've got to maintain it, you've got to take it forward. So when is it that it starts to get unhealthy in any manner? Is when we stop nurturing it. Is when we start taking this one person who we love the most for granted, just because we've now been committed to each other, just because we know now that we're stuck together. Somehow we start to focus more on the longevity or the quantity, for how many years we've been together, instead of what's the quality in those years. And the moment we get on an autopilot mode with our partner in our relationships is when I think the health of the relationship starts to take a toll. And this is where all the, I think, mess up starts to happen.
Right. Getting a little more into it, there is this term that we find on Google every time we look up for the word toxic relationships, and it's red flags. So what are red flags, and what is the whole fuss around red flags? How is it related to toxic relationships? And yeah, what do you have to say about that?
Right. So, when you get on Google and you read about toxic, these red flags, which I've done a lot for the sake of research and for the sake of like being there myself in the past and just being really curious as to what is this behavior, I think it's very misleading to write down a list of behaviors and call them toxic or red flags, because like I said, that it's so contextual. It's so um, related to a certain situation. It's so subjective that it can become very misleading to tag a particular behavior as a red flag or as toxic. You know, um, for example, I'll tell you one of the biggest contradictions that I come across when I read such articles is that, for example, the article says that if your partner is asking for too much attention and if they're threatening or manipulating you into getting that kind of attention, then it's a red flag. Now, what happens is that because of this, we start to look at such similar behaviors. All of these behaviors, we put them under the category of a red flag. But this might as well be a call for help that your partner is making. Or maybe this is your partner trying to tell you that they're genuinely suffering um, because of any emotional baggage that they're carrying, and they genuinely want you to be there for them. But the moment you turn your back towards it just because you label it as a red flag, there you go. You can't really save your relationship, because the first thing, because this your partner's going to remember that you were not there for them when they were at their most vulnerable self. So I guess again, looking at the behaviors and saying that these behaviors are red flags, I've done that in the past as a psychologist, but I think as I sort of kept digging deeper, I realized this won't be the best approach to follow. So what I do now is that what I've realized now, working with my clients, working on myself, is that it really is about one thing, and that is consciousness. I mean, the entire fight is, let's look at it like this: red flags versus green flags. And the entire fight is between consciousness and being on autopilot mode, being on a default mode. Each time that you're going to be on a default mode, on an autopilot mode, where, like I said, you're just going to take your partner for granted. Now that you've come into a relationship, you know that they're always going to be there for you. So you're like, yeah, fine. Or there are other things that have taken a front seat in your life. So you're on an autopilot. You're not caring. You're not checking. You're not uh, you know evaluating the health of your relationship at this moment, and you're just going as, like just passing days with your partner. This is where you're on autopilot. When you're on autopilot, you're not going to look at, why are we fighting about the same things over and over again? Why have suddenly we don't feel as drawn towards each other? Why is my partner suddenly started to be more quiet? Why are we not having as much sex? Or why is there um, why is the passion missing now? We look at these things, and that's it. We just look at these things and that's it, and then we don't look at them. It takes work. It takes for you to get into the depth of these issues. But like I said, the entire focus is on staying together. The entire focus is on how can we celebrate many, many anniversaries together. And it's not on, but what's happening from one anniversary to another? What's happening in the time in between? How are we feeling on the days we're not celebrating our anniversary? How are we able to bring any kind of happiness to each other? Is there health in relationship? Are we growing together? Are we both comfortable? Are we both expressing things to each other? Are we able to be vulnerable to each other? Is our communication growing or is it getting worse? Okay, now we've changed cities. So, or we're going to change cities, or you're going to get into a different university, or we're going to have a child, or we're going to get married. So are we discussing these transitions, sitting with our partner before these transitions actually come into our life? Are we planning how are we going to navigate through these things? So these are the things that you do when you're conscious, when you're so aware in what you're doing with this person, that you're going through each of these phases of relationship together. You're anticipating the possible challenges that may come your way, and you're already talking about how are we going to navigate through this. Most of the relationships break at a point where they are undergoing some kind of transition, that there is a third person scenario. For example, someone's best friend has returned, or someone started college, or someone started working. So, the equation has changed. The timings that you used to talk at, or someone's moved to different countries, the distance has changed, you're not meeting as much. All of these transitions is what is, they can be possible threats to relationships, but they can also be opportunities to build your connection stronger if you're aware and if you're already having a lot of conversation around it. Versus when you're on autopilot, everything that you do is you engaging in red flag behavior and then not looking at it also, not calling it out also. I think what's on the foundational level, what's underlying this red flags is that you're on default mode. You're not looking at what's happening in your relationship. So the toxic patterns are just continuing to grow, both in the relationship and on your individual levels. For example, one of the red flags, as they say, is when your partner is too dependent on you. Okay. They sort of are always breathing under your nose. They want your um, crazy amount of attention from you and uninterrupted attention, and they want you at all times, etc. Now, let's talk about both of these people, the person who's wanting this dependency and the person who's at the receiving end of it. Now, this person who's wanting so much of dependency, you just don't suddenly one day wake up and become very dependent. It comes from your childhood. It comes from where are you coming from? Is it that you were brought up in an environment where you were abandoned by your parents on some level? Were you emotionally neglected by them because perhaps your sibling needed more attention because they were too naughty or too lazy or severely ill or too stubborn or for whatever reason, and you could not get that sort of an attention, and growing up you always felt abandoned and neglected. So you've been deprived of that sort of an attention, and now all you look for is that kind of attention, that kind of stability, that kind of sense of, okay, this person is always going to be with me. So what you're doing is that at different occasions, you're always looking for reassurances from your partner. You're always calling them and always making sure that they are sticking by you to ensure that wounded child inside that this person won't leave me. And you're suffocating the partner, and you yourself are pushing the partner away by engaging in this behavior. So you see the paradox that you're trying to make sure that this person stays, but that making sure behavior only is pushing them away. So when you're oblivious of this pattern, when you're not aware of where you're coming from, you won't even know what you'll end up manifesting in the relationship. This then becomes a red flag. So any behavior that comes from an autopilot mode, that comes from a place where you're not conscious what is happening, where is this coming from, you're not taking responsibility for it, it's going to be a red flag in a relationship. Looking at the person who's at the receiving end of dependency, a point of question is that if they're so suffocated, what makes them continue to feed into this pattern? Are they someone who's coming from a place of being a caretaker in their family? Where the parents were too preoccupied or were sick or had their own baggages or were anxiety patients or mental health patients or had chronic illnesses, and the child learned at a very early age that in order to be in my parents' life, I need to become a caretaker. The roles were reversed. My parents couldn't take care of me. They couldn't give me that unconditional love and acceptance because they were preoccupied with their own baggage. But every time I tapped into that caretaker role, I got a crazy amount of attention from them. I got a lot of appreciation for that behavior. So I learned that in order to get love, in order for people to stay in my life, I need to be giving. I always need to give things to other people. And the moment I demand that I also want something in return, or the moment I express my needs, I'm going to feel immense shame. And I'm going to then feel the fear of being abandoned, because that's what happened to me in the childhood. Each time that I would express my needs, my parents would dismiss me. But each time I would take care of their needs, they would be very, encouraging of it. So are you both in a codependent relationship where you're the caretaker, so you're only giving, and the other person needs a lot of reassurance, so they're receiving, and both of you are not really taking care of each other. Both of you are not really with each other. You're taking care of those wounded children inside of you, you know. So it's really both of you trauma bonding. This is not you bonding with each other as partners. This is you bonding because of where you're coming from in your life. This is where codependent relationships are born. So this is one pattern. Similar to these, there are many, many patterns. But I guess to conclude, red flag behavior is any behavior which happens outside of your consciousness, outside of being mindful. Anything you do in a relationship mindlessly is a red flag.
Right. I mean, that's very interesting and a very fresh perspective on it, because often I think what I hear a lot of people say is that, when you are supposedly in a toxic relationship and you feel that your partner is toxic, then red flags is something that's always looked in an opposite context. And similarly, I feel like a lot of people in the relationship, they see toxicity stemming from just one person, wherein, like you said, that, autopilot mode is something that anybody goes into because they want to keep it long and going. So, I mean, what do you have to say about that on if toxicity, if it's even possible that it's only one person who's pushing all the toxicity in the relationship?
No, I don't quite agree with that. I think that it's never people who are toxic. It's never relationships that are toxic. It's the patterns that are toxic. You take the toxic pattern away, and every couple has a potential of becoming a very healthy couple. So you, but what happens is it's very difficult to look at people outside of their toxicity, without their toxicity, because it's so enmeshed into their personality, into what they've become. But it's always both the people struggling on some level, having been struggle in their childhood, coming from a place where they've been, like I said, wounded in some way or the other emotionally, and they're just getting their needs fulfilled through their partners. So it's always both the partners. What happens is sometimes, like, it's seemingly more evident with one partner because their behavior is more overt. It's easy to be seen outwardly, and the other person, like for example, we just discussed the codependency pattern. It's very easy to see the dependent partner and call out their toxicity, but we will not be able to call out the toxicity in the caretaker, because in our society there are certain behaviors that have been glorified. So for example, a behavior that is classically glorified in our culture is the behavior of sacrifice. Just like sacrifice in a relationship. Don't say what you want. Don't talk about your expectations. uh, we say statements like adjust करना पड़ता है. कोई भी relationship perfect नहीं होता है, उसको perfect बनाना पड़ता है. But how are we expecting people to make it perfect? By shutting themselves up, by not saying what they want, by not expressing their expectations. So this behavior is glorified so much in our culture that what happens is that it's always these two people who come together: the dominating person who wants things their way, who grew up with a lot of emotional entitlement, where the parents um, gave them everything that they wanted, did not say no to them, etc. They grew up with a lot of entitlement. And this person who grew up with these messages where they're told that, mostly women, but also men, where they're told that you have to just like sacrifice. If you want to be happy in life, you have to listen to your partner. These people learn at a very early age that the day I express myself authentically is when this person is going to leave me, because this has happened to them in the childhood. Because in childhood, each time that they expressed something, that they did not comply, or they did not obey their parents, they were called out for that. They were shamed for that. They were uh, parents were very punitive. So you learn that, oh, your child mind is very intuitive. It very intuitively learns that, oh, so each time that I'm myself or I'm expressing my emotions, it's not accepted because there's something that's wrong with my needs, with my emotions. There's something wrong with the way I am. So I need to be more sacrificing, more compromising, more giving, and I'll just have to allow the other person to get away with whatever they're doing. And it's only then when I can have this person stay with me. So the behavior of betraying yourself to keep a person in your life is glorified in our culture. And so we will never be able to call this as a toxic behavioral pattern. But it's always two people who are bringing in that kind of toxic patterns in the relationship. Otherwise, the puzzle pieces won't fit, right? You got to fit with each other. A person who has a strong sense of self will never be able to partner with someone who is dependent on them, because they will not derive any sense of self from the dependency of that person. They don't need to derive their sense of self from someone depending on them. They're pretty fulfilled in themselves. So that's why a secure person would most likely end up with a secure person, and person with insecure attachment patterns will attract people who sort of fit in that jigsaw puzzle.
Right. And I mean, just taking a small break from the conversation, I think if someone who's listening this, I'm sure there are some introspections happening. Like we, spoke about how I mean, both the partners somewhere contribute towards this toxicity, and they just become a part of building those patterns. So again, I think accepting this and realizing this, it's not easy. I mean, I'm sure it's not easy at all. So what do you say to someone who's having these introspections right now, someone who's kind of rethinking, relooking at those patterns and realizing that, yeah, maybe I was a part of that puzzle somewhere?
Right. So first of all, what these people need to hear is that you don't need to solve everything today. You don't need to now quickly fix everything and make your relationship better from tomorrow. The moment you realize that you have been a contributing factor in the toxicity in your relationship, also there's a massive anxiety that results. Now, this anxiety gives rise to a lot of controlling behavior. You either try to control yourself, or you try to control the outcomes of what you've already done, or you try to control your partner. Know that if this toxicity, if these patterns have built up in years, it's going to also take time to unlearn these patterns, to let them go, and then start to relearn some new healthy ways of connecting with people. So one thing that you need to hear and just allow that to sink in is that you don't need to fix it all today. I understand that there's still going to be this question lingering on that, oh, what do we do now? This is like very overwhelming piece of information. So like, give us something now. So here's what: if you're feeling too overwhelmed, if you have a counselor, talk to them. If you don't, get one. If you don't want to do that, journal. Hear your thoughts. Collect everything and say and put it on a paper, and hear yourself saying those things to yourself out loud. There's a phrase that I really go by when I work with my clients, and it says, you can't heal what you can't feel. So allow yourself to delve into what you've just realized, to delve into that insight, and let it evoke those emotions that it's evoking. Do not resist those emotions. Put them on a paper. It'll take care of the overwhelmingness a little bit. And after that, there will be a lot of shame that will follow this overwhelming feeling. Shame that, oh boy, I've been doing the same thing. I've been hurting my partner so much. I've been causing so much harm, so much guilt that, do I even deserve this person? They should totally leave me. No wonder all my exes left me. I'm such a bad person, etc. And know that our fight is not with our instincts to depend on a person or to get love. Our fight is with this shame, because it is this shame that has kept us away from recognizing our patterns. Each time we came close to understanding what we're actually doing, this shame came up and it told us, oh boy, you're such a bad person. And you went back into that dark place. You switched the lights off again and you're like, I don't want to see this reality. So it's always this shame that keeps you away from getting in touch with the realities of your life, of your relationships. So acknowledge this shame also. Do not cut shame with shame. That, oh, I'm feeling shame. I can't feel shame. How can I feel shame? This is trying to cut shame with shame. It's not going to work. You have to melt the shame with compassion. So acknowledge it, see that, okay, it's this shame now which is making me quickly want to jump to a conclusion, quickly want to solve everything today. Then also recognize, where is this shame coming from? Is this shame also coming from childhood? Have I grown up listening to things like, इतना कौन रोता है, किसी लड़के के लिए कौन रोता है, किसी लड़की के लिए कौन रोता है, how can you be so broken for another person? you know there is strength. How can you be so weak? How can you be so sensitive? If you're going to be sensitive, people are going to walk all over you. You got to be more practical, you got to be more logical. So is there a lot of shame attached to your emotions? Did you, growing up, did you learn that basically getting in touch with your emotions is wrong? That's the worst thing that you can do to yourself. So get in touch with this inner dialogue that's happening with you right now, and take a break. Be honest to yourself. Continue to switch that torch on and look within. And just remember that you don't need to solve everything today.
Right. I think very nicely put, and it's so important that it's a very brave thing to do, to have these introspections, to talk to yourself, and it's important that we keep doing that without judging the voice inside, because it's you. So very important. So anyway, moving forward with our conversation. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room and ask you a question that I've heard a lot. Is there any study or perhaps your observation that says that women are more likely to fall into a relationship like this, or contribute more, or suffer more in a toxic relationship than the male counterpart?
No, there isn't. Not that I've come across. But I'll tell you what I have seen in my practice. It really boils down to what kind of a childhood you had, how were you brought up, how were you treated in those very formative years of your life, which really laid the foundation of the rest of your life. What you do as an adult, how you react to things, how you perceive things, what hurts you more, what doesn't, what can be very normal things for others but can be huge triggers for you. All of this comes from your childhood. How have you been brought up? What kind of things you had to see as a child? And trauma is one thing which doesn't have gender. you know Suffering is one thing that doesn't happen to a particular gender. It really is about what kind of dynamic were you brought up in, and that dynamic, and anyone can be a prey to that dynamic. Any gender, anyone with any sexual identity or orientation. And of course, because of the gender issues, it just the traumas are more in that direction, because there is more. We're still learning. We're still, these are the things that are still new for people to acknowledge, that there can be more than just two genders and sexual orientations, and there's a whole other baggage that these people carry, that children carry when they do not fit in, or they're not a part of the majority, as they say. But I have not seen this in my practice, that it's only women who are at the receiving end of this. Like I said, that there are some things which are just overtly more visible, which are just which we can see and say in a split second that, oh, this is toxic, this is abusive relationship. But you see, relationships and all the kinds of crimes also, for that matter, that happen in relationships, they're so private. They happen behind those closed doors, inside those shut curtains, and you can never tell what is really going on between a couple until and unless you hear it from both the people. I think one thing that sort of adds to it is that women are just comparatively, relatively more vocal about their emotions, because again, culturally, they are still allowed to express. For men, however, it's just not an option. When I work with my male clients, I see the amount of, I've not worked with one male client so far who's not been at the receiving end of shame growing up for being sensitive, or emotional. Some of them learned it the hard way. Some of them observed that, oh, you get shame if you express your emotions. So they shut their emotions very early on in their life. So, the way men interact in sessions, the way they open up in therapy sessions is also so different from how women do it. It takes so much time for them to get comfortable. Um, you know, they're fighting. I can see them fighting with their shame at every second. They're something that they want to say is here, but they can't let it out. And I can see shame all over. It's rampant. It's a bigger problem than we think it is. And I guess this is one of the reasons because of which definitely the sufferings of our male counterparts are not as visible to us as our female clients.
Right. Now let's talk a little bit about when you go in that autopilot mode and when you start observing. I mean, I do feel that sometimes people are able to see that there are toxic patterns. They're able to see that, this is one area that requires work, or they're able to see that, this is no longer a relationship that's giving me happiness or it's giving me what I want from it. But it still continues, it still continues. So how does one draw that line that, now it's enough? Now there has to be something done, and that something could be either way. You go either way. You either end it and you do something else, or you move forward, or could be that you you gain consciousness back again and you try to take control. So how do you think, can you explain a little bit about why this pattern gets prolonged, and how does one identify that now it's about time?
Right. Um, to answer your first question first, why do people continue to stay in relationships that are not serving them well? Again, I'll go back to childhood. It's because they're desperate. They're desperate for that kind of love. They're desperate for that kind of attention. And when you're desperate for something, you don't see what comes with it. And there is so much shame around the words like desperate, being needy, that you just shut yourself completely. You don't want to look at that. There's so much shame behind being needy. That also takes you back to the childhood. It's everyone who experiences this kind of shame around their needs is because they've been dismissed every time that they express their needs to their primary caregivers. You know, and why is it that people continue to stay in these relationships is because they are giving them everything that they have been deprived of. Desperation always comes from deprivation. Now that they're finally getting what they were always looking for, they don't want to let it go, you know. And somehow the stakes seem a lot higher. You feel like, no, but this is more important. And your own sense of self, your own self-esteem, your self-respect, your self-worth, your self-value takes a back seat, and attachment with this person seems like, the like a lottery, and you wouldn't want to let go of this. So each time that if you're coming from a place of being a wounded child, being a child growing up with parents who couldn't be there with you in the capacity that they should have, um, and later on when you become an adult and you're confronted with this choice where you either have to choose yourself or you'll have to choose the attachment that you have with this person. You're always going to betray yourself and you will end up choosing the partner. Because again, it's taking care of everything that you've been deprived of. Or at least it looks like that they're taking care of everything that you've been deprived of. And you feel like, I'm finally getting it. Someone's finally in my life. I don't care what they're doing to me. I don't care what they're bringing to me. At least they're here. And it seems like just so hard. People literally end up saying things like, I don't think I can breathe a single day without this person. I don't think I can have a life without this person. And we need to hear this, when people say it, because this is how deeply wounded they've been, that they have started to derive their entire sense of self from this one person. Because their individual self, their authentic self has been betrayed long back. They stopped being with themselves long back. They didn't feed into this, you know. I mean, imagine, let's simplify it. If there are two bowls, okay, a bowl of authentic self and a bowl of attachment. And when you were younger, each time that you poured into this bowl, you couldn't, your attachment bowl was empty because your caregivers were like, okay, so let's look at it this way, that you were made to attend some gatherings growing up, or your parents were very religious, or they wanted you to go to a certain religious gathering with them, and you didn't want to go. You expressed that you don't want it. You threw tantrums. You acted out. But what you were saying, what you authentically wanted, was not respected. You know, each time that you expressed that I want your attention, I want you to look at me, by acting out, or by directly asking for it, or by crying, you were shamed for doing or manifesting that kind of behavior. Or your sibling was given more attention than you because they were somehow more sensitive in the eyes of your parents, for whatever reason, because of the birth order or any kind of illnesses. Now you learned that in order to have my parents' attention, I got to stop doing what I'm doing. I got to stop saying no. I got to stop asking for that attention. I got to stop being demanding, So you shut your authentic needs, your authentic self long back. So what you learned, that in order to pour into the bowl of attachment, I need to stop pouring into the bowl of my authentic self. So you learned at a very early age that I can't have both. I'll have one of these things. So you grow up, these bowls also become bigger, but you continue to pour into the attachment bowl. There comes a point where you entirely stop pouring into this bowl of your authentic self, because it seems like it has not brought you any happiness. There's no point in doing that. So this bowl takes a back seat, and it's very easy for you to betray yourself to keep this relationship going every single time. And that is why it becomes so difficult for you to look at what is this person doing to you. Everything that you always wanted in your life, there is an illusion that you're getting it, but are you actually even getting it? How will you know if your needs are being met when you have suppressed your needs long back? This is where you get stuck in that sort of an equation with blindfold on your eyes. And that is why consciousness is the only thing that will set you free. When you start to look at these patterns, when you start to become aware of what is really happening, what am I really doing? Am I really feeling happy? Am I really, and your emotions are going to be, your emotions will take you to this bowl again, this bowl that has not been fed into for a long time, because your emotions are a mirror to your authentic self. They're a reflection of your gut. You start following your emotions, they will take you back to your authentic self. So to be conscious, to be able to look at your emotions, is how you get to know that I am stuck in a very unhealthy equation. When people are not able to do this, this is when they continue to stay in toxic relationships like these. What was your second question?
Yeah, my second question was that how does one realize that now it's that point wherein it's the last straw on the stack, this is it, I have to do something.
Well, they should have realized that a long time back, but you know how they say jab jago taki savera. So I mean, it's never late. You can that's the beauty of life, that you can set the reset button at any point, really. And all those resources that you need to start afresh, to set yourself free and start from zero, you always have those resources within yourself. You've not been able to have access to them for a very long time, but the moment you start to have access to them, you realize that I have that entire reservoir inside of me. I can unfold my potentials, and I can take care of myself, and I can be a visit parent to my inner child who's not been taken care of. There's a process that we make our clients undergo in therapy when we're working on their inner child wounds, which is known as reparenting. So in reparenting, we introduce your adult self, metaphorically speaking, like introducing your adult self to your inner child, where you realize all the needs that you had that have not been met. You are now, since now you're an adult child, you have more resources, you're a more developed self. You can now take care of the needs of this inner child. You can nurture it, you can give it what it has not gotten. And this is how we take care of that deprivation. When we take care of deprivation, the desperation automatically comes down. So this is how we work through this.
Right, makes sense. And like you mentioned that every relationship stands a chance to become healthy again. When you gain consciousness, there are a number of possibilities on what turn your relationship could take. But again, I mean, I think when, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that when you gain consciousness, that is again a decision that you have to make. That where do I want to take this, right? So, are there any parameters that or anything that you'd like to mention that can help anyone who's probably listening and is stuck in that phase and they figure out ki karna kya hai. So is there anything that could help them understand themselves better on what is it that they want?
Is this after they've realized their toxic patterns, or
I mean, like you said, that after they realize that the toxic patterns are there and it's about time that something has to be done. So basically, probably they're at that juncture and then turning off the autopilot mode, and now they have to see what direction the plane goes into. So,
right. So the first thing, and we do this with our clients in sessions as well, that the first thing is that to recognize that you've not nurtured your authentic self for a very long time. And you've just been betraying yourself to choose other people. So what you do with that consciousness, where you take it next, is then to start to realize, how am I betraying myself? How am I continuing to betray myself in all the areas of my life? From smallest of the instances. For example, I'm in a group of people, and I really want to fit in. I want to be a part of this group. And there's a conversation going on, and everyone is engaged in that discussion. Everyone is sort of on one side. However, my thoughts are not exactly aligned with what they're talking about. I think differently, but I'm just going to give in. I'm going to betray my own thought process, my own opinion, in order to, fit in. And each time that I engage in this kind of behavior where I'm betraying myself in order to have that sort of attachment in my life, I just need to bring light to this kind of behavior. You don't need to fix this behavior, you just need to look at it. You continue to look at it, it stops working for you. Like, it stops giving you that kick. Betraying yourself and trying to fit in stops giving you that kick. And that's when you start to set yourself free from, okay, I am not going to betray myself for whatever. On the other hand, I'm not going to fit in, I'm going to belong. There's a very big difference between the two. They're actually opposites, they're on two ends of a pole. When you're fitting in, it requires you to let go of your thought process, and be a part of that group by complying, But when you're trying to belongingness requires for you to bring your authentic self to the table. When you have a group of people who you feel belonged with, you're not all on the same page always. You don't always share the same opinions. You have very different views of the world, But that is what makes you want to stay with each other. You stay with each other because of each other's authentic selves, because of, not despite of each other's imperfections, but with each other's imperfections, for each other's imperfections. And that is why people who continue to betray their authentic selves always struggle with having permanence in their life in terms of people. They don't have lasting relationships, romantic or otherwise. They keep losing friends. They keep jumping from one romantic relationship to another. It's because in no relationship are you bringing your authentic self in. And what happens is that when you bring in your authentic self, there's a lot of filtering out that happens. People who can't take it, they automatically go away. And when you don't want them anyway, you would not want people in your life who reject who you truly are. So they anyway, their paths get separated from yours. And people who can handle it, people who genuinely like you for who you are, they stay. And people who like you for your authentic self will never leave. Because you're both connecting authentically. You didn't meet them when you had the mask on. They didn't meet you when they had the mask on. And so eventually there was no taking off the masks and confronting realities and them not wanting to be with each other anymore. That sort of dynamic never happened only. So this is what you need to do next. You need to continue to feed into your authentic self, and your authentic self will guide you as to what kind of people do you want in life, what kind of career do you want, how do you want to, where do you want to draw that boundary, how to draw that boundary, who to allow in and who not to do that, who to be vulnerable with, who not to do that. You will get all the answers.
Right, makes sense. And I'm sure, Praneeth, that this juncture wherein you're trying to gain consciousness again, trying to talk to yourself, it's again a very, very difficult space. It's often uncomfortable, and like this one phase that you said, it stayed with me, that they feel ki nahi hoga. My life cannot happen without that person. So, is there any way that, because I mean, I do believe that we have all the courage that we need inside, right? So how do you become friends with that courage? How do you put the foot down and say that no, this is it? Because that's again extremely difficult.
Absolutely. And you don't have to start with putting your foot down. You don't have to suddenly become a hero or like a lady beam in one day. You don't need to do that. You can start with just like, that's why I said that you don't need to fix everything in one day. You can just start with seeing the reality. But even after seeing the reality, if you still want to, if you're not convinced enough, or if you feel that you don't have the courage to move out of this, that's all right. Continue to have the lights on. That is what is important. And still continue, if you still want to carry out that behavior, do it. What will happen is that when you come down from that default mode and you will start to be conscious in this relationship, whatever it's serving you, the way that it's serving you, you will start to see it differently. Let it happen automatically. You don't have to force yourself to reach that level. Let your consciousness guide you there. That's what the problem is, that I think this is a big scam that the self-help industry has done, that we're running after results. कि ठीक कैसे होगा, the how to's. It's not so much about the how, as it is about the living, really, like just the doing it now. कि वहां कैसे पहुंचना, it's not about that. It's really about the process. It's about how you're looking at your reality today. How mostly all the crimes happen in the dark, because it's easier to get away in darkness. Similarly, all self-sabotaging behavior also happens in the darkness of our consciousness. We turn the lights off, dimag ki batti band karke. Then we're able to sabotage ourselves. If this light is on, it's not easy to sabotage ourselves or to stay in places that rather harm us. Firstly, it'll bring in a lot of conflict. Now that conflict is healthy. It's a sign of healing. Because now at least there are two voices. Earlier there was only one voice, which was misguiding you. Now there is this other voice, your authentic self voice. And there's a constant conflict between these two voices. This part wants the attachment, the connection, love to stay together. This part wants justice, wants true belongingness. Both of them are fighting. And what makes matters worse, ये जो statement है ना, that I won't be able to do this. This is not courage. This is shame. This is not the lack of courage. This is the presence of shame. Because you have been shamed into believing that you can't do things for yourself. And you don't need to cut shame with shame. I keep saying that, in my sessions also. You need to cut shame with compassion. So be compassionate to both of these voices, because both of these are you. This is what you held on to when you were having difficult times in life. This is what you've recently started to nurture. These are both you. So if you want to say no or get out of a relationship, value that. But if there's a part of you that also wants to stay in it, understand which part of you is wanting to do this. And be kind to this part. Is this the part of you that has been abandoned in childhood? Is this the part of you that has never ever gotten a safe space to be yourself? Is this a part of you where you're finally feeling accepted? Is this a part of you where you're finally feeling that someone is just going to stay with me, you know, because I've never had that? And be kind to this part. Just let your consciousness work through you. Let it continue to be there. And whenever you feel that I am seeing the reality too much and it's not serving me anymore, the result will be automatic. You will proceed automatically, and your consciousness also gives you courage. So it's like, how we used to play those video games, those Mario, Contra, etc. So if how they have these 5 lives, 4 lives, so you can't go really far in a particular level if you don't have a particular amount of number of lives. you know so if you have 2 lives and you're trying to make it to the level 5, that's just unrealistic. Your the game is going to get over time and again. So it's all right, go slow, let those lives build up, and then you can make it to the level 5. Right now, if you have 2 lives, just stay on level 1, and just be authentic to yourself on that level, how much ever you can afford. When you'll be authentic to yourself on that level, that'll help you earn one more life. You'll be able to go a little forward. You'll be able to be a little more courageous with your life. Remember that you don't have to do it once and for all. And if there's something inside of you that's making you want to do it once for just all at one time, it's shame. Recognize that. Shame eats your lives up. There might appear a star, but you'll pick it up and it'll be hollow inside. That is what shame does to you. It's like turmoils. On the outside everything is okay, but from inside you're hollow. It eats you up from inside. So shame is our biggest enemy, and that's what we want to fight.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so now I think let's move to the last segment of this show today, wherein we're going to take up a few questions that some of these questions our community has sent us. Some of these are most Google questions. Some of these have also been taken from Quora. Some statements that we felt that a lot of people might have in their mind. So we'll quickly take that up. All right, so taking up the first question, it's a statement. Um, I just got into a relationship with a nice guy after 3 years of being in a toxic one. I feel so nervous and scared because my last one traumatized me. Is it normal to feel this way?
It's normal. It's absolutely normal to feel this way, but it's also important to recognize that you're carrying a baggage from your past relationship to this relationship. And of course, you're going to feel this way. It's normal, but is it healthy? It's not. In fact, with time, these insecurities are going to grow. Why? Because even if you manage to end up with a good person, if you're carrying the baggage of being abandoned or being just left and rejected in the past, you're always going to look out for that. You're going to be hyper vigilant, and you're going to always make sure that that doesn't happen with you again. So you will start to perceive threat even at the places where it's not there. And that is what starts to suffocate your partner. And the baggage that you're carrying, you start to throw it on your partner. And this is where a relationship that you were anticipating to be bringing you any kind of hurt actually starts to bring hurt, because this behavior actually starts to push the partner away. Maybe earlier they were not trying to get away from you. Maybe it was just in your head because you had that kind of emotional experience. But this is like a whole cycle, or a vicious cycle, where you get stuck in, where it begins with health, but it goes down that same spiral because of the kind of baggage that you're carrying. That's why we always say that, take like a good amount of time before you get into your next relationship, so that you have time to heal. But I think I'll go one step ahead from that and say that it's not really about taking time, it's about what you do in that time. So know that it's still not late. It's never late. You can still work on this baggage by being in this relationship that you're in. If you think that this is an honest relationship, you have an honest partner right now, communicate it to them. Tell them that I think I'm carrying the baggage from my past relationship. I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to take some time, get into therapy, get help, and communicate it to this partner that, hang in there, and I'll work on myself, and because I want to make this work. But there's one thing that's really important here, and that is that do not make your partner take responsibility for your baggage. This is a bit tricky. Now this always happens every time that I've seen this kind of advice backfiring. That saying, telling the person that go tell your partner that you're suffering and to cut you some slack. What happens is that each time you put out this kind of insecure behavior and your partner is not able to take that, or they like call you out on that or whatever, you tell them, but I've told you, I've been through so much, you can't do this, you no, we can't do this to our partners. We cannot hold them responsible for the baggage that we are carrying. While you tell them that hang in there, it doesn't mean that they can't be irritated or they can't have their expectations from you. It is just to let them know where you're coming from so that they don't take it personally. But know that they are going to have their set of emotions as well, and they're obviously going to react to what's coming from your side. So while you ask for this kind of time and um, like this kind of an understanding from their side, also take responsibility, full responsibility for this behavior, and work through your baggage.
Right, that makes sense. Moving on to the next question, it's someone says, okay, this is again a statement, and this one says that despite being a feminist, I haven't been able to work out on my 3-year-long toxic relationship. I feel I betrayed myself.
I feel I betrayed myself.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think I followed the question.
Okay, so the question is, despite being a feminist, I haven't been able to work out of my 3-year-old toxic relationships. I feel like I've betrayed myself.
You won't be wrong in saying that you betrayed yourself. But what happens is that we can carry some belief systems. We can very strongly believe in certain things, but we can still act in ways that are not consistent to those beliefs. Because there is your ideological self, there is your intellectual self, and then there is your emotional self. And both of these selves can sometimes not be integrated. They can sometimes not be in harmony with each other. And that happens primarily when you come from a place of being wounded in the past, in one way or the other, in your last relationships perhaps, or in your childhood again. So you can very well be a feminist. You can understand what is wrong and what is right, and you can voice your opinion for other people. But when it comes to your own case, it's not that you're not suddenly a feminist when it comes to you. But what happens is when it comes to yourself, you're a feminist, but you're also a human who has emotions and who has been wounded in the past and has been betrayed and abandoned and things like that. And do not think that just because you've become a feminist today, your emotions are not going to play out. And your emotions are just suddenly going to, disappear. You're going to have to work through your emotions in order to be an integrated feminist, where you're able to practice your feminism for other people, to ask for justice for other people, to stand for other fellow men and women, and for yourself. And for that to happen, you have to work through your issues. You have to work through the kind of emotional baggage that you're carrying. Understand why is it that you ended up betraying yourself and you continue to stay in an unhealthy relationship for 3 years. Remember that if you were needy, if you were desperate, it's because you were deprived. Desperation always comes from deprivation. Get in touch with your deprivations and you'll know why you did this.
Right. I hope the person found their answer here. Moving on to the last question. Is it normal to be suffering after a toxic breakup 2 years ago?
Again, what is normal really? Uh, Normal is something that's practiced by a big majority. Then yes, it's normal. A lot of people are going through that. Is it healthy? It's not. Is it something that you need to look into? Are you thinking that is just maybe this is how it happens and it's going to go away on its own? No. It is absolutely an unhealthy pattern, and if it's not really about time, it's about how deeply have you been hurt. Sometimes you come out of a relationship and you don't even grieve for it for a week, or you grieve for it for a month and then you move forward. So it's not about how much time were you grieving for or how much time were you stuck with that person. It's about how successfully have you moved on, how successfully have you worked on the damage that this relationship uh, brought in. Sometimes people look very well, very properly, nicely moved on from the outside, but when they get into the next relationship, you can very clearly see that they're carrying the baggage. So then they've not really worked through that breakup or the damage that it has done to their sense of self. So yeah, definitely not healthy.
That makes sense. So before we conclude and part ways, anything that you'd like to say as probably a concluding message to anyone who's watching this?
Yeah, just two things I think, to just repeat myself. One, that um, turn the lights on, you know, uh, turn the lights on inside your own mind, and look at your emotions. Do not fear them. They're not your enemies. They're your friends. They're going to guide you right. And second, the only enemy that you have and that you have to befriend is shame. This shame is going to make you feel very little and very small about having needs, about behaving in impulsive ways. So remember that desperation always comes from deprivation. You get in touch with your deprivation, you will know why are you acting in the ways that you're acting. And shame will automatically become your friend.
Thank you, Praneet, for this discussion. It's been extremely insightful. It's been, I'm sure it's going to be extremely introspective for a lot of people. And if you're someone who's watched us throughout and you're still here with us, thank you so much for watching. Please do let us know how you liked it. And we're going to be back next week again, talking about a different relationship concern. And yeah, till then, keep pouring your heart out.